Alright, what is good, ladies and gentlemen, is the Master Reviewer back again with another review, and today we are doing a review for Jojo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2, aka Battle Tendency. That is right, I rewatched the Part 2 today, and no real background really other than that, so let us just get into it. So, I'm going to attempt to recap the plot, and just like last time, it's going to be a bit difficult, but just bear with me. So the plot of this part is that you follow now Joseph Joestar, who is the grandson of Jonathan Joestar from Part 1, and basically this part, Dio is not the antagonist. This time you have the Pillarmen. The Pillarmen, they are these men that end up getting unearthed by both Robert Speedwagon as well as the Germans. This takes place around the time of World War II, so there are some Nazis and like Nazi characters, but it's not really, like, I was like kind of conflicted of like, oh, okay, there's certain characters here that like specifically like Mark and Stroheim that are Nazis, but they're like, I like those characters, so I was a bit conflicted about that, but we'll get into that with the characters. But anyway, so the Pillarmen are unearthed, and so this part is basically that the Pillarmen, they're trying to get a stone, a special stone called the Stone of Aja, not Asia, A-J-A. Yeah, so they want to get the stone in order to use it on one of the stone masks that Dio uses in Part 1 in order to basically allow them to be exposed to sunlight and then unlock like the full potential that they have and control all biological life and stuff and basically take over the world. So there are 4 Pillarmen. There is AC/DC, Cars, Wham, and then there is another one that is introduced to at the very start. I'm trying to see his name here. His name is, Santana. So there are 4 Pillarmen. Santana is the first one to kind of get unearthed, and he ends up killing a bunch of Nazis, and then Stroheim, I keep on getting his name confused. I'm still looking at the Anime Planet list of the names, which does group both characters from Part 1 and Part 2, so it just gets a bit confusing at times to find certain characters. But yeah, Stroheim, so you have Joseph and Stroheim, they end up fighting off Santana. They manage to defeat him, and then actually before that even happens, Joseph is in New York. We get introduced to Joseph. He's in New York, and he ends up fighting Straits from the last part. He ends up like going mad with age and stuff, like kind of turning evil, and so he ends up Joseph, he fights Straits, who ends up using the mask that Dio used in Part 1. He basically says, oh, Dio was arrogant with it. I'm going to make sure that any threat to me is dead so that I can unlock the full potentials of the mask and stuff. And so that ends up happening. And Joseph, he ends up meeting this kid Smokey, who's just kind of along the ride for the entire rest of the part. And so then he goes to Mexico, where the whole thing with Robert, he ended up, before this, I'm kind of going out of order with this, I apologize, but Straits ended up killing, I think he didn't kill Robert, but he almost killed Robert along with everyone else that was on the expedition because Robert was the one to initially, his company, the Speedwagon Foundation, they were the ones to end up uncovering the Pillarmen. So you do have Straits, so that's how he ended up getting that's how he got the stone mask, I think, and then that is so Robert, he ended up getting retrieved by Stroheim, and then from there, that's when Joseph goes to save him, and at the same time, he ends up finding out about the whole Pillarmen thing and Santana, as well as Stroheim. That's where he meets Stroheim, and then Stroheim ends up sacrificing himself during the battle, and so basically that's done with, and then, okay, moving on, you have Joseph. He then goes with, he's told from Stroheim that he needs to go meet Lisa, I don't think directly he's told Lisa, but Lisa, she is, number one, she's Joseph's mother, and she is the one that ends up training Joseph and Caesar in the art of Hamen to improve the Hamen, because at the moment, Joseph, like, he has control of Hamen, but a very bare bones version of it, that, like, it's still pretty good, but definitely not, it's very rough around the edges, kind of, and he needs to kind of smooth out his abilities in order to be able to really be effective going up against the Pillarmen. So he meets Caesar in Venice, and then Caesar being the grandson of William A. Zeppeli from Part 1, and so you have Speedwagon, Caesar, and Joseph. They go to meet Lisa. Lisa trains them, and then skip ahead, you have the Pillarmen. But okay, before this happens, I think, this was before I think they even met Lisa. Before that happens, they actually end up meeting the Pillarmen directly, where they end up getting taken to see the Pillarmen, by this soldier Mark, and then they go there, and then Mark ends up dying from the Pillarmen. The Pillarmen end up getting unearthed, and then they have a fight. They fight against Wham, who destroys them basically. But then Joseph pulls a bluff, basically saying like, "Oh, give me a month to train, and then I'll be able to beat you," basically. So that ends up happening, and then from there they end up going to meet Lisa, and then she ends up training them in Haman, and so yeah, from there you have Joseph. He ends up fighting off AC/DC, and then so that happens. He ends up winning, and then skip ahead. So now AC/DC is out of the picture, and then you have they're in. I forgot where they are exactly. I think they're somewhere in Switzerland because AC/DC at the time he was like. Before he ended up dying, he died, but then a part of him was still alive, so he used that small part of him to end up controlling Susie Q, who is the person that she works for. Lisa, she ends up marrying Jojo by the end of the part. So Susie, she ends up sending it was the gem of Aja that Lisa, she was the one that was protecting it. Straits gave it to her in order to protect, and so Susie Q ends up. While being controlled by AC/DC, she sends it to Switzerland, so then they all go to Switzerland. While they're there, they end up finding the castle that Kars and Wham are staying at, and so Caesar wants to just go in there guns a-blazing because we find out about his backstory where originally his father left his family, and so he hated his father, but then he ends up finding out that his father actually he left in order to protect the son of William A. Zeppeli. He left in order to basically continue Zeppeli's work and find a way to defeat the Pillarmen, so then it changes Caesar's whole view on things, and now he wants to defeat the Pillarmen. So yeah, that ends up happening, and then he ends up fighting Wham, and then in the process he ends up dying. He dies, and so yeah. Then you have Lisa and Joseph. They go confront Kars and Wham, and I'm pretty sure they're in a very bad position at the moment. So they end up saying they say, okay, let's settle this with a duel. It'll be Joseph versus Wham and Lisa versus Kars, and so that ends up happening. So you have the final confrontation between Joseph and Wham. They end up fighting. It's a very honorable match and stuff, kind of reminiscent of Tarkus versus, was it Tarkus? Yeah, not Tarkus, sorry. Bruford against Jonathan in part 1. So there's a very kind of respectful match that is between Joseph and Wham, and so they end up fighting. Joseph ends up winning, and then finally there is the confrontation between Kars and Lisa, and then but that's not as honorable. Kars ends up cheating, and then using some deception tactics and stuff, so he ends up putting them. But Joseph throughout this entire part, he's just pulling absolute BS. This show very much, it's very much just characters just pulling BS out of nowhere to be able to get out of situations and stuff. And it's nothing new. They were doing it constantly throughout part 1. But Joseph especially, it feels like when thinking about something you have Dr. Stone or Death Note, where it's you have characters, they're very much they have to think in very tight situations, what the best course of action is, and what the right move is in order to come out on top and stuff. And here in Death Note, it's not as much, because Death Note, they do actually I don't think there's as much moments where it's characters on the spot have to think of something to, there's a few moments like that from what I remember, but not as much as something like Dr. Stone, where Dr. Stone, especially when you get into the war, the war, the battle parts of the show, where it's Stone Wars, or in season 3, New World against the Science Empire versus Ibarra, or the Science Empire versus Zeno's Science Empire. So there are definitely moments where it's characters have to think on the spot of solutions and stuff. But there, it's it kind of is okay. It feels way more believable. Where here, it's okay, Joseph, he has a split second, and then he manages to come up with some out of nowhere plan of just I'm gonna pull some absolute bullshit that in no way there's the whole incorrect timing trope and incorrect spatial trope that I've spoke about before, where it's in certain moments there will be things will take too long, realistically. I don't know, you're waiting for here in Dr. Stone, that's a good example, where it's they had 20 seconds in order to cause as much damage as possible before the troops, they would end up realizing the fight or flight instinct would change from flight to fight. So that was and that ended up lasting the whole half an episode. So that was an example of the incorrect timing trope. So in this show, it's to the max, absolutely everything, just both the incorrect timing trope and the spatial, the incorrect spatial trope is just, it is the way that the characters move and stuff, and the certain, it's just, there's obviously, there's Haman they're still using, so that's supposed to be the excuse for how all of this is possible, but even with Haman, I struggle to believe that any of this is possible to, but then again, this is like an anime where this anime especially you need to suspend a lot of disbelief for a lot of the stuff that happens. So, like, yeah, I don't want this to sound like a criticism because it's not really criticism. It's just something that I'm pointing out because it is very, very noticeable. So, yeah. Anyway, what part was I on? So I think, yeah. So Joseph, just out of nowhere, he manages to, like, he doesn't have the upper hand. He has the opposite. He has the lower hand or whatever. He's on the low in the fight. Cars has the upper hand. He's about to beat Joseph, but then out of nowhere he'll pull some BS just to be able to come out on top. He's like Joseph. He has so much more. Joseph has like the highest battle IQ out of not even just anyone in all of Jojo, like that from what I remember, Joseph has like the highest battle IQ out of like any character that is in this series, and honestly, in all of anime, like he probably has one of the highest battle IQs from, at the very least, the anime I've seen. Like I can't think of another character that's able to just come up with these plans on the spot. So, yeah, definitely, just someone pointing out, I guess, a very cool attribute for his character, I guess. So, but anyway, so he does manage to defeat Cars, and then Cars is like on the ground and stuff, and at that point, Stroheim, he ended up dying earlier, like, against Santana, but then at this point it was revealed earlier. It wasn't like a lot earlier, to be honest. Like by the time I missed the part about where they ended up staying. So they ended up, when they went to Switzerland, they ended up finding out that Stroheim is actually alive. So they ended up staying at like this hotel area or like this resort or something with Stroheim, and then so that ended up happening. And then Cars ended up fighting Joseph, and then Joseph managed to get a hold of the Aja, like he managed to protect it, making sure Cars couldn't get it. So that also happened at some point earlier that I just forgot to mention. And see what happens after, back to where we were. So yeah, Cars, he's like on the ground. Stroheim, he arrives. He brings out a cannon with UV light that he's about to use. Him and his soldiers are about to use the cannon in order to defeat Cars and kill him, basically. But then Cars manages to put on the stone mask with the Aja crystal, which then this specific mask, it doesn't activate by blood. I think like this specific type of mask, like it's a mask that it's Pillarmen, they can't put on regular, like if they tried to put on a stone mask and just use blood, it wouldn't work. Like they need specifically a mask with the Aja stone, and in order for it to activate, it's not blood, they need like actual sunlight or UV rays in order to activate it. So Stroheim, he notices that he's like putting the mask on with the stone, so then he gives the order to like, he revokes the order to fire the cannon, but it's too late at that point, and so the UV light shines on him, and so Cars activates his like final form, I guess. And so yeah, this leads into the final confrontation where Cars, he's like able to morph his body into like different animals and stuff. So then yeah, Cars, he decides like, okay, for the first step in my new life, I'm going to kill Joseph and Jojo, and so he ends up going to attack Jojo. And then at some point, I think apparently Stroheim, he manages to like escape from the group, and then he stows away on the plane that just out of nowhere, Jojo, he ends up running away, and then he reaches a plane that's just out of nowhere that I don't, like maybe he was aware that it was there. Like he apparently was aware that it was there, but I don't remember at any point that that was planned out. So yeah, anyway, so Jojo, he gets on the plane. Apparently Stroheim also managed to get there, that we just didn't see him, and then he was like stowing away there. So the final confrontation, Jojo, he's flying the plane, and then it's like a fight in the air against Jojo in the plane and you have Cars, who's like flying with the wings he now has. So, and then the final, like, Jojo manages to like lure him into a volcano, and then I keep saying the final confrontation, this is all like one final confrontation, like Jojo against Cars. So, and then so then during the volcano, and then the final confrontation continues to happen. I'm not really getting into the specifics of like how the character, like Joseph, manages to defeat Cars, because to be honest, I cannot remember the specific. Like I remember like kind of what happened, but it would be way too difficult for me to get into the specifics of like exactly the techniques that Joseph uses in order to defeat Cars and stuff, like the BS that he pulls out of nowhere. So yeah, so then that happens. Joseph, the ultimate way he ends up managing to defeat Cars was that he launched him into space. Basically, he used volcano eruption to launch Cars into space, and it's like it's like a pretty dark death, like where he doesn't even die. He's in space. He's floating away from Earth, and he tries to like use air to like push himself back towards the direction of Earth, but then he can't, because like his body's like starts freezing and stuff. So before he manages to, so he's just like floating, drifting away in space, and he ends up, so I guess he just ends up, they state that he's just like in space now, and he just eventually his thoughts like cease to he stopped thinking, I guess. So he's basically dead. So I just thinking about it now though, I am wondering like eventually wouldn't he drift close enough to a star to like melt, I guess. So that seems a bit, I guess that just seems like something that I just thought of at the moment. But anyway, so yeah, they save Pillarmen are defeated. Everyone thinks Joseph is dead because to be honest, I have no clue how he actually survived. He was like all the way towards the top of the, I think it's called the stratosphere. Like there's the atmosphere, or I don't know which is which, but he was like extremely high in the air, close to the I think it's called the Kármán line, where it's like between where space is and our atmosphere or something like that. So he's like really high up, and then he's on this like rock that's like falling down to Earth, and then apparently he manages to survive that. I don't know how. Like absolutely, I feel like he should have died, but yeah, he falls in the ocean, and then anyway, cuts to a funeral. Everyone's at Joseph's funeral, but then he returns. He reveals that he's alive, and he ended up getting fished out by a boat. He went back to Venice. Susie, she ended up nursing him back to health. They ended up getting married, and then that's when he went back to the funeral. Susie forgot to send out a telegram basically telling everyone that Joseph was still alive, and so yeah, that is why everyone thought that he was dead. And that is where the part ends basically, and then you just have like some aftermath stuff of like we find out what happened to everyone. You know, like some pretty good endings all around. Smokey ends up like going to college. He ends up becoming mayor of his city in Georgia. What else? Stroheim, he ends up like he died in battle, I guess, but he managed to like portray. He's like very much he's like a Nazi, but he's like less so. He hates like Jews or blacks or whatever people that the Nazis didn't like. So he's less of like that kind of. I mean, he does like he does start off the first time we see him. He actually takes like a bunch of. I forgot if they were specifically black people, but it was he took like a bunch of people, and then he basically said like, okay, pick one of you we were gonna pick one of you to be a sacrifice, and then the kid ends up volunteering himself, and then he kills everyone else. So he's definitely not like a good character, and so it is like conflicting of like, okay, it's a character that I kind of like, but he is a Nazi, so it's like I don't know what to feel about that. So anyway, yeah. So but then he ended up dying in battle at some point, but they said like, oh, he was able to portray Germany's like that Germany's science is like the greatest or whatever. So. I want to say he's like less so like driven by hatred, I feel like, and more so driven by like national pride, I guess. So I guess to the extent of a Nazi, that's I guess somewhat better than the alternative. But yeah, I'm still like conflicted about the character. But anyway, we'll get to that with the characters. So yeah, that happens. Arena, she ended up dying, but she ended up dying like of old age around her family and stuff. Speedwagon, by the way, I forgot to mention this. Apparently, like at the start, the Speedwagon like he has a foundation now because when he got to America. He apparently stumbled upon like like oil, which made him one of the richest. He started this Speedwagon Foundation, and that's like apparently one of the most successful companies like in the world now. So the Speedwagon, like they show up also in later parts where they're just like helping out at points in the series. So yeah, that's how Speedwagon got his money. If you were wondering, and if you're, I'm assuming if you're watching this review, you've probably seen the actual part. So honestly, I always wonder like what am I doing these recaps for? Because like most people that watch this. Still, I think it's like for me because if not, I'm kind of just like speaking about stuff that I want to like make it clear that like it's like a few things. It's like number one, I want to like prove that I actually saw it, like know what I'm talking about. So it's like proof that I actually saw it, as well as kind of just like giving everyone like a recap. I guess like okay, this is what we're talking about, and then I dive into the aspects that I already spoke about. So anyway, so yeah, Speedwagon he dies like also of old age and stuff. Anything else? I mentioned Joseph. He gets married to Susie, and that's nice, I guess. Lisa, she apparently also remarried to some Hollywood writer, which I didn't remember. Like, I watched this the first time around, but I guess I forgot about that detail. And I don't think it's, like, mentioned after this part, so, yeah. And, yeah, that is basically the plot. So, the plot I'll give, like, I would say I'll go, like, a 3 out of 5. I don't remember what I gave the plot of part 1, but I will say that this plot, it was all right. I did think that, yeah, it was definitely, like, bizarre and stuff. A lot of... I think it could have maybe been paced better, like, by the time you get to, I think, it's, like, 17 episodes in total, and I think by the time you end up getting to Switzerland, after they, like, decide, like, Lisa, and Joseph, they decide on the fight, it's, like, the last, I think, 8 episodes or something, or maybe I'm mistaken, but at the very least, I think, like, the last 6 episodes, it's all, like, taking place in one area at, like, the same hour, and it feels like the fights are kind of... they're going. The fights themselves are like kind of multiple episodes long, and so it does feel like maybe the pacing could have been a bit better at times. But yeah, overall, it was an alright plot. I would give it like a. I don't want to say. Yeah, I don't want to say like I like the plot, but I do think that it was definitely alright. I would say so. I'm just gonna go with 3 out of 5 for it. So yeah, in terms of it, like I'll just say this. I think probably part 1 maybe I like the plot of part 1 a bit better because it was just like smaller and simpler, like kind of easier to follow along to, I guess, where it's like this one is much more of a grand adventure across the world and stuff. But even I think that part 3 does the whole adventure across the world better, in my opinion. So yeah, anyway, so the characters, let's see here. I'm going to do a character tier list after this for all of the part 2 characters, but yeah, in short, I'll just go over, I guess, like just a few of them. Caesar, he's great. He's you know, I liked him a lot better on rewatch this time around. Joseph, he is, I think personally, he is my favorite Jojo protagonist, and yeah, he is just very entertaining. I think Jonathan, he is very polite and stuff, whereas Joseph, he is very much like kind of sporadic, and like you can't really predict like what he's going to do and stuff, and he's like a lot more charming and like funny and stuff. So I do think that Joseph is just a more entertaining protagonist to watch. And yeah, besides him, I'll just briefly speak. Lisa, she's good. ACD, I like the villains. The villains, it's like it's kind of like the opposite, where in part 1 you had Dio, who was like very much the hater, and you had Jonathan being respectful, where this time around it's like Joseph, he's kind of not the hater necessarily, but Joseph is very much like the more chaotic one, whereas the villains, they're more respectful, I guess. Well, in the case of Cars, a bit less so, but yeah. What else? Stroheim, I have like conflicting feelings about the whole Nazi thing, but you know, he's still a fun character. I'll say that. And what else? I'll get into the rest of the characters in the character ranking, but overall, I give the characters, I would say probably I go with 7.5. I say that the characters are very good, and yeah. In terms of the settings, let's see here. What do you have? You have New York, which was nice to see a bit at the beginning. You had Venice, which I thought was pretty nice as well. Mexico, which was good, and you know, some nice snow areas. The final confrontation area. Honestly, I think the final confrontation area, it was like I like the Colosseum area where it's like Wham and Joseph had their final fight on the chariots and stuff. I thought that was cool, but the rest of the area, like the final confrontation between like Lisa and Cars, it was just on this like weird beam, which here I'll say this, it was good for like the whole plot point of the situation that Cars put Joseph in, where it's like he tied Lisa to a rope and then threw. And so it's like Joseph had to hold on to the rope while Cars was like approaching him and stuff. So I thought it was a good environment for the tricks that Cars used, but it was like kind of, I don't know, just a bit boring other than, like, besides that aspect. The environment itself is like not anything that great, I would say. So, but yeah, overall, I'd give the settings, I would go like probably I'll go like a 7 out of 10. I'll say it was pretty good settings. I did like it. And yeah, in terms of the art style, I will go probably I forgot what I gave part 1's art style, but I would give this art style probably I don't know, like a 7 to a 7.5. It's like between pretty good and very good. I think that's, I mentioned this in part 1. I think I'll give it like probably, I'll go very good. I'll say a 7.5. I think it's a very good art style. It is just more on the realistic side, and I just kind of gravitate more towards the more cartoonier art styles, I guess. Like, again, something like more so like Konosuba or Dr. Stone is like a bit. Yeah, no, I would say Dr. Stone is also like a bit more cartoon-like compared to this, where it's like this, again, Jojo very much goes for realism, and I think realism, it works, and it's like its own thing that I think is good, but it is, I just kind of have my preferences steer my taste towards other art styles, I would say. So in terms of the action, once again, it's not really like action that there is in Jojo. It's more like, no, it definitely is action, but it's more so like tactics that the characters are using, like different. There's no like it's not like very fluid fights that the characters are having and stuff. At the very least, I think in the next part, when we actually start using stands and stuff, like I think part 1 and part 2, because it relies on Haman, which is so very much like a tool rather than a weapon. Like Haman is like used in order to, like, you need good tactics in order to be able to use Haman efficiently. Where in the next part, it will probably get into a lot more. When we start using stands, it is going to be like a lot more action, I think, that we'll be seeing. So yeah, I would say the action was probably like, the tactic, like, once again, is like basically just tactics, and I think that the tactics, I would say, are, so I should probably group it in like action / tactics, I guess. So I'll just do that for the sake of it. Yeah, I would say that the tactics are like, once again, it's very much just like Joseph pulling things out of his ass. Like none of it is really like just split seconds, and he comes up with just some random just method to be able to beat his opponent, which it's fun to watch. Like, definitely, I don't want this to come off as a negative, because I would say it's definitely a positive. It just does make for a fun viewing experience, and to see what happens. So, and I'll say this, when you're rewatching it, and maybe it's because it's been a few years since I rewatched it, but I feel like even if I would rewatch it now, when you rewatch, well, maybe not now because I just finished watching it, but if I waited like a month or something and I rewatched this again, I feel like, because it's so specific, like the kind of tactics that the characters use, then it's like so random and stuff, on rewatch, it's like probably difficult to even remember like the certain tactics that the characters use to get out of situations. So I feel like it would be, this is probably like, I think this is probably a good show to rewatch for the sake of just watching like all the chaotic like randomness and just absurdism of the show, I guess. So yeah, I'd give the tactics probably, I would say like I'll go like I'll go an 8 out of 10. I'll say that they're great tactics. I do like it very much, and yeah. In terms of the worst thing I would say is just once again maybe the pacing. I felt like maybe certain stuff could have been maybe a bit shorter or a bit longer. Not necessarily a bit longer, but it did feel like, I don't know, just once you get into like the third act, it just kind of feels like it's certain moments or maybe just drag along a bit more. So yeah, I would probably, but it doesn't ruin it for me really, so I'm just gonna give it like a 5 out of 10, I would say. So other than that, I can't really think of anything else specific, so I'm just gonna go with that. In terms of the best thing, I will say that the best thing was probably, you know, I'm gonna bring the score down for the action / tactics. I gave that like an 8 out of 10, and you know, no, I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep an 8 out of 10 because I was gonna say like I want to say the best score was the characters, but I think I might actually, which is a 7.5, so I just wanted to balance out because I want to say that the characters were the best thing. But I actually think that are the characters the best thing? I might actually say that specifically Joseph is the best part because Joseph is just such a great protagonist, I would say. But honestly, all the characters are. I think I might raise the score for the characters. I think that more than very good. I would say that the characters are like, not amazing, but I'll go great, honestly. I'll say an 8 out of 10 for the characters, and I'll reuse that as the best score. I will say 8 out of 10. Great characters, definitely Joseph, Caesar, who else? Stroheim, Lisa. Like, I'll get into this with the actual character ranking once again. So, but yeah, I will go an 8 out of 10 for the characters. And yeah, that is all the scores, so I'm going to do the calculations. So I did decide ultimately that when we get to part 5, we'll celebrate by actually putting the clip of King Crimson, but for now I'm still just gonna do the image. So yeah, so I'm gonna do the calculations. So King Crimson. All right, so it ends up coming out to about a 7 out of 10, which would be pretty good. And I think I'd give it a bit higher than that. I think I would probably go between a 7 to a 7.5. I would say I thought it was between pretty good and very good. And I don't think I'm gonna give a concrete answer. I think I might need to let it marinate a bit longer. So I'm not gonna give a concrete answer. I'm just gonna call it between pretty good and very good. I did like this more than part 1, and so yeah, this is. Yeah, from what I remember, this was one of my favorite parts. I think, I think this was, here, what is it, at the moment, I've seen like 6 parts. I think this was in my top 3 from what I remember. So, and it's not number 1, it's not number 2, I'll say that. So I think this was like my 3rd favorite part out of all the parts. So yeah, I would say that this is probably a 7 to a 7.5, I would say, between pretty good and very good. And yeah, that is pretty much all there is to it. So if you have any recommendations, any shows, movies, video game stories, anime, manga, web series, anything that you want me to review, leave it in the comments and I will maybe possibly check it out. With that said, that is pretty much all there is to it. So let's leave it at that.